Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is John Okello. I will be presenting with my colleague, Professor Sheba Akhtar. We are colleagues in Prairie A&M. That's the second oldest public institution of higher learning in Texas. And we're from the School of Architecture. Professor Sheba will take it over from here.
Thank you, Professor. Good morning, everyone, and it's a pleasure to be here. So thank you for having us. So we will be talking about architecture education, and we need to talk a little bit about it because it's atypical, quite different from other fields of learning, in that it is a creative education. It's also collaborative in nature, and it is based, practice-based. So the traditional model for architecture has been a master apprentice method of teaching and practice. Next, please. So it remains that format even till today, where the setting for teaching is not a standard typical classroom, but what is called a design studio, where the critic plays the role of the client, sometimes of the boss, and also, of course, of the teacher. Next, please. Now, traditionally, the culture of architecture has been extremely patriarchal, where there has been a pronounced gender disparity, and traditionally, very few women have risen to the ranks of the top echelon of the profession. However, things are evolving. It has been an evolution in the culture of architecture. Next, please. And this chart shows that, so that over the last 3 decades or so, women have been advancing in the profession, and they are also increasing in numbers at schools of architecture. However, the path remains difficult. On the left, you will see a graph where we are showing the fact that there are only 7 HBCUs. Those are historically Black college, universities and colleges in the United States, ours being one of them, that produce 1/3 of Black and minority architects in the country, whereas the remaining 132 remaining institutions that teach architecture only produce 2/3. So you can see the racial disparity there in academia, as well as in the practice. On the right, you will see that whereas Black Americans, African Americans make up 13% of the population in the United States, their representation in the architecture profession is only 6.3%. So they are grossly underrepresented in the profession. And then within the Black population of architects and architecture students, there is, again, this is compounded because the representation of women, Black women within the Black community of architects is also hugely underrepresented. So whereas the second pie chart from the top shows you that among Black students in higher education, 2/3 are female Black students. However, among Black architecture students, only 1/3 are women. So that disparity persists in racial as well as in gender terms. Next, please. However, yes, things are evolving, but they have been evolving rather slowly. So here we are looking at another measure of this disparity, which is showing us how many Black architects and academics have received the highest architectural awards, in fact, in the world. And some of them are American awards. So the American Institute of Architects, AIA Gold, so far has only been received by 1 Black architect. There have been no Black recipients of the Topaz Medallion so far. There's been only one recipient of the Pritzker Prize in Architecture, and that is architect Francis Carey, who is photographed here on the left. And I will in a moment be showing you a project by him. And there have been only 2 distinguished professors who are Black among all the distinguished professor award recipients in the United States. So again, that's another measure. Now, another aspect of this evolving culture, which hasn't changed a whole lot, is that the profession has traditionally been and remains elitist and exclusive in nature. Most architects are employed to design large projects, mostly institutional or high-profile commercial projects. While very few are engaged in designing public projects, and now here I would like to point out can we go back for a moment, please? To the project on the right, which is this beautiful school in Burkina Faso that has been designed by the architect. Can we go back one again, please? Architect Francis Carey, who's photographed here on the left, who is the only Pritzker Prize winner, the first and only Black architect in the world to have received the Pritzker Prize. He is the architect, next please, of the school on the right that I just showed you in his home country of Burkina Faso. So that problem of elitism persists in the profession, but things are slowly evolving. Next, please. So the title of our talk today is Evolution, which has been occurring but very slowly, and revolution in architecture education and the profession. So as we all know, in recent years, the world has been impacted hugely by revolutions. And these have, of course, had left their mark on architecture education as well as the architectural profession. And these have acted as catalysts for change. One of these, so the social revolutions that have hugely impacted the world and architecture are, of course, the Me Too movements and the Black Lives Matter movements. So these we have talked about the problem of gender as well as racial disparity that have persisted in the profession and in architecture education. And these movements have directly had consequences and impacted as catalysts to bring about change to address those disparities. Of course, on top of that, the world has been hugely impacted by the coronavirus pandemic, in fact, and architecture and architecture education have been no exceptions and have been hugely impacted by that as well. And that we hope will bring about some much needed change, especially technologically, that will enrich architecture education and the architecture profession and address some of the disparities that have existed. And to that, I would like to ask Professor Okello to continue with our presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Sheba. So as was mentioned before, the architectural profession has typically been modeled after master apprentice, and the architectural education as well is modeled in a similar way. We have the instructor and the student, and then the occasional critic. And the architectural studio itself is a place that is uniquely designed to curate the unique nature of architectural education. It's unique in the sense that unlike other professions or teaching, the classroom itself has to be designed to cater for this collaborative process. It's a very tactile process. And so what you see on the slide is actually images from our particular institution. You see a floor plan with a layout that has been designed to facilitate this the collaborative nature of the teaching process. and to also facilitate the tactile nature where we have to build, we have to discuss, we have to draw as well. And so our one of the challenges that we've had, especially when it comes to the coronavirus, is that pivot from a physical studio, because the studio requires 24-hour access, it requires collaboration, it requires communication, it also requires students to have the ability to have independent study. When we say 24-hour access, the reason for 24-hour access is the nature of design. The design studio is you might have a class maybe from 3 to 4, but the bulk of the work happens to take place after studio, where students have to draw, they have to build, they have to discuss. And so you have to provide a space and a place for this to occur. The studio, the physical studio, also has to act as a workspace, a review space, a presentation space, a process space for them to think through their designs, as well as a storage space. And so it was very difficult to imagine how we could pivot, especially when the coronavirus hit, and we had to find a way to simulate these unique characteristics in the virtual space. They tend to be very tactile in nature, and that was the challenge. Of course, technology, like most programs and most situations, was the answer. And even though technology has been an integral part of design education and up till this point, the challenge of switching from a physical space to a virtual space was one we had to think through. Technology, initially the thought was this might be a very difficult pivot, but as you can see from the charts and some studies done, it actually turned out that it wasn't that difficult for most of the educational institutions to make that change. And so with at least one device, most students could actually engage in the learning activities in the school without necessarily being in person. In our particular case, we turned to a virtual board. There are a number of virtual boards. You have Miro, you have Stormboard, you have Mural and Limnu, but we opted for the Miro board. And what this allowed us to do is to simulate these special characteristics. The Miro board is simply a whiteboard that students could access from wherever they were. And we were able to therefore have 24-hour access. It was a collaborative space that they all could be on in real time and communicate. It is a creative environment. It's also autonomous because individual students could privately do what they needed to do, as well as engage each other collaboratively. And it also served as a review space, presentation space, process space. We were able to do this in conjunction with a number of different programs and platforms like Simplicity, Canvas, Zoom, SketchUp, Photoshop, and InDesign. And so these actually represent initial first year classes. And so one of the unique things we did was introduce the use of something as simple as a cell phone as a tool to generate content and allow them to execute some of the projects we traditionally did in studio, in person. And so what you see here, actual student produced projects that allowed us to focus on the fundamentals of design, which is a first year course. And so we were able to use a simple cell phone, have them create the artifacts that they're supposed to for the course. For the more advanced courses, we're also able to use the Miro board as well as the other programs as a platform, just like we would in studio, to work and then pin up the work and review. And so what you will see now is an actual video of the studio in progress where you can see students actually engaging each other in real time. One of the good things about this program is it also gives the instructor a global view. You can actually see all the projects in real time, and it allows the students to do the same. So the idea of collaboration is enhanced in the virtual studio using Miro. Towards the end of, well, we did this for about 2 years. And now that we are back in person, we've come to the conclusion that the best situation would be more of a hybrid studio. Of course, the virtual studio does have its drawbacks. One of the things is you don't have complete control of what the students are doing and the focus that they have in class. But we were trying to take a ameliorative approach where we take the best of maybe a tough situation. And so we picked the best aspects of the virtual studio and married them with the advantages of the physical studio. And one of the tools we used is this cart that allowed us to have the tools packaged in there, cameras, overhead projectors, microphones, speakers, and we're able to engage the students in a in-person setting as well as a virtual setting, so we have the best of both worlds. And I think that concludes our presentation. Thank you. Any questions, please?
Thank you for your presentation. So it was nice to see the picture from Antoni Gaudí. It's Catalan. Thank you. So
one of our favorites, absolutely one of the greatest architects ever.
Good, thank you. And I will want to ask you about how did the students feel? So they feel better now with the new technology, or just before the COVID? So how did they feel about working with this computer technology?
I would say the result has been positive. We've had students who started off completely online, and they've transitioned. I had them in first year. Professor Akhtar had them in second year, and they did remarkably well. We do have some, there's obviously some students, a small percentage, who feel they're better off in person, but I would say most of the students are appreciative of the option to have that content available 24/7 without necessarily being on campus. Our campus is kind of far out in the countryside. And so this has been a plus for them.
And it's funny because when we returned to in-person teaching, some of them wanted to continue to be online because they got used to the comfort of not having to commute and getting dressed up, and they could just get out of bed and turn on their computer and, be in class.
Good, thank you.
Thank you.